The smell of charcoal and cheap beer hung heavy in the humid afternoon air, a smell I once associated with happiness. From my car, parked a block away, I had a clear view of the backyard. My father, spatula in hand, was holding court by the grill, laughing loudly at something my uncle said. My brother Kevin was showing off his new designer watch to a circle of fawning relatives, a watch I knew he couldn't afford. It was the perfect picture of a happy family celebrating Father's Day. Their laughter drifted on the breeze, grating against my ears like nails on a chalkboard. They looked so content, so blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. I watched as a man in a crisp, dark suit walked calmly up the driveway. He didn't look like one of their friends. He carried a large manila envelope. He navigated through the clusters of chatting family members, his eyes fixed on one person, my father. I saw my mother point my dad out, a proud smile on her face, probably assuming this was a courier delivering a surprise gift. The man approached my father, said a few words I couldn't hear, and handed him the envelope. My dad took it, a confused but self-important smirk on his face, as if he was about to open a special commendation. The smirk vanished the moment he broke the seal and slid the documents out. The color drained from his face. The spatula clattered onto the concrete patio. The laughter died, replaced by a ripple of concerned murmurs. Kevin strode over, his brow furrowed in annoyance, and peered over Dad's shoulder. His jaw went slack. The whole party ground to a halt, frozen in a tableau of confusion and shock. My father was being served with a lawsuit and foreclosure papers on the home he secretly mortgaged, the home that was legally mine. He didn't know that the bank had already sold the bad debt directly to a private LLC I had set up for this very purpose. In his hands, he held his own ruin, delivered by me, his forgotten daughter. You might be wondering why I'd choose Father's Day to deliver this final blow. To understand that, you have to understand the price I paid for a love they never intended to give me. The smell of charcoal and cheap beer hung heavy in the humid afternoon air, a smell I once associated with happiness. From my car, parked a block away, I had a clear view of the backyard. My father, spatula in hand, was holding court by the grill, laughing loudly at something my uncle said. My brother, Kevin, was showing off his new designer watch to a circle of fawning relatives, a watch I knew he couldn't afford. It was the perfect picture of a happy family celebrating Father's Day. Their laughter drifted on the breeze, grating against my ears like nails on a chalkboard. They looked so content, so blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break. I watched as a man in a crisp, dark suit walked calmly up the driveway. He didn't look like one of their friends. He carried a large manila envelope. He navigated through the clusters of chatting family members, his eyes fixed on one person, my father. I saw my mother point my dad out, a proud smile on her face, probably assuming this was a courier delivering a surprise gift. The man approached my father, said a few words I couldn't hear, and handed him the envelope. My dad took it, a confused but self-important smirk on his face, as if he was about to open a special commendation. The smirk vanished the moment he broke the seal and slid the documents out. The color drained from his face. The spatula clattered onto the concrete patio. The laughter died, replaced by a ripple of concerned murmurs. Kevin strode over, his brow furrowed in annoyance, and peered over Dad's shoulder. His jaw went slack. The whole party ground to a halt, frozen in a tableau of confusion and shock. My father was being served with a lawsuit and foreclosure papers on the home he secretly mortgaged, the home that was legally mine. He didn't know that the bank had already sold the bad debt directly to a private LLC I had set up for this very purpose. In his hands, he held his own ruin, delivered by me, his forgotten daughter. You might be wondering why I'd choose Father's Day to deliver this final blow. To understand that, you have to understand the price I paid for a love they never intended to give me. As the years went on, the scale of the problem simply grew. Kevin's teenage requests for video game money morphed into adult demands for rent, car payments, and seed money for a series of pathetic get-rich-quick schemes. There was the dropshipping business where he ended up with a garage full of unsellable phone cases. There was the revolutionary app idea that never got past a logo he designed online. Each failure was followed by a frantic call, not from him, but from my parents. "Kevin's just finding his feet," my mother would say. "He just has so many creative ideas. He just needs a little support." The translation was always the same: open your wallet. I, meanwhile, had done everything they claimed to value: I got a scholarship to a good university and studied finance, not because I loved it, but because it was practical. It promised stability. I got a job at a large investment firm, worked my way up, and built a life of quiet success. I wasn't flashy. I drove a modest car and lived in a simple apartment. They saw my frugality not as a strategy for wealth building, but as proof that I had plenty to spare. To them, my savings account wasn't for my future. It was the family's emergency fund. The real crisis came about 5 years ago. My dad called me, his voice trembling with a panic I'd never heard before. The adjustable rate mortgage on their home was about to reset to an impossible figure. He'd hidden the problem for months, hoping for a miracle. Now, the bank was threatening foreclosure. The home I grew up in, the one constant in my life, was about to be auctioned off. A family meeting was called. There was a lot of crying and hand-wringing. Kevin sat on the couch, looking pale and useless, offering no solutions. As always, every head in the room slowly turned to me. So I made them an offer. I would be their miracle. I would pay off the entire remaining mortgage balance in one lump sum. I would buy the house from them, putting the deed solely in my name, free and clear. In exchange, they could continue to live there for the rest of their lives, completely rent-free. It was an act of extreme generosity, a deal no one in their right mind would refuse. My mother wept with relief. My father, his eyes wet with tears, took both my hands in his and told me I had saved them. He swore he would be the best steward of my property, that he would protect my investment, and that he would never, ever forget what I had done for them. It was the proudest I'd ever seen him of me. That feeling, I would later learn, had a price tag. For about a year, everything was different. The dynamic shifted. I wasn't just the emergency contact anymore. I was the matriarch in waiting. They called for my opinion on things, invited me over for dinner just to see me, and spoke of me with a tone of reverence to our relatives. "She's so smart," my mother would say. "She saved this family." I allowed myself to believe it. I thought that my grand gesture had finally bought me a new role, one of respect and love. I let my guard down, believing the war was over, but I had only won a single battle. The peace was conditional, and the conditions were about to be breached. The catalyst, as always, was Kevin. He decided he was going to be an importer of luxury Italian leather goods. He took a trip to Italy, funded by a dozen maxed-out credit cards, and came back with a shipment of overpriced, ugly handbags that no one wanted. The credit card bills came due, and the suppliers he'd sweet-talked into giving him terms wanted their money. He was in a hole nearly $50,000 deep. And so, the familiar ritual began. The frantic phone call from my parents, the tearful explanation, the unspoken expectation. But this time, something in me had hardened. I had already saved them. I had secured their home, their future. My duty, as I saw it, was done. When my father finally made the ask, laying out the exact amount Kevin needed, I gave them an answer I had never used before. No. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, confusion. "What do you mean, no?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "I mean no," I repeated, my own voice firmer than I expected. "I am not bailing him out again. He is a grown man. He needs to learn." The shift was instantaneous. The pleading turned to shock, the shock to anger. The respect they had shown me for a year curdled into bitter resentment. "I can't believe how selfish you've become," my dad spat into the phone. "After everything we've done for you, you'd let your brother be ruined over a little bit of money? Money you have plenty of?" They saw my boundary as a betrayal. My refusal to be their bank was an act of cruelty. The call ended with my father hanging up on me. A few weeks later, he called back, his tone artificially calm. He said he needed a copy of the deed to the house for an insurance audit. Wanting to seem reasonable after our fight and suspecting nothing, I scanned it and emailed it to him. I had no idea I was handing my own father the weapon he would use to stab me in the back. After that phone call, a wall of silence went up. Months passed. There were no more pleading calls, no angry texts. My birthday came and went with only a generic one-line email from my mother. The holidays were quiet. A part of me felt guilty, but a larger part felt a profound sense of relief. I started to believe that my no had finally worked. I imagined they had found a way to handle Kevin's mess themselves. Maybe Kevin had finally gotten a real job. Maybe my father had put his foot down. I clung to this fragile hope, this fiction that they were becoming self-sufficient, because the alternative was too dark to consider. The truth arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, tucked inside a glossy envelope I almost threw into the recycling bin. The logo read Paramount Financial Trust, a lender I had never heard of. I ripped it open, annoyed at the volume of junk mail I received. But this was not junk mail. The letter inside was addressed to me. "Welcome," it said in cheerful blue font. "We are pleased to confirm the activation of your new home equity line of credit." I stared at the paper, my blood turning to ice. My name, my address, the property I owned outright, and a credit limit of $100,000. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. It had to be a mistake, a scam, a sophisticated case of identity theft. My first thought was to protect my parents, to warn them that someone was targeting our family's address. I immediately called the number on the letterhead, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and indignation. I was ready to report a crime. "Yes, ma'am," the loan officer said after I explained the situation. "I can see the account right here. It's all in order." "It's not in order," I insisted, trying to keep my voice steady. "I never applied for this loan. Someone has stolen my identity." "Well, the application we have is very thorough," he said, a note of boredom in his voice. "We have a signed application, notarized documents, and even a copy of the property deed provided by the applicant for verification." A copy of the property deed. The words hit me like a physical blow. The insurance audit. My father's strangely calm voice. The email I sent him. It all clicked into place in one horrifying, sickening moment. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a random act of fraud. This was my father. He had taken the deed I sent him, forged my signature, and stolen the equity from the home I bought to save him. He had looked me in the eye and lied, all while planning a betrayal so profound it took my breath away. He hadn't just gone behind my back, he had committed a federal crime against his own child. For a long moment after I hung up the phone, I couldn't move. I just sat in my apartment, the lender's letter shaking in my hand. The shock had frozen me solid. But then, the ice melted, replaced by a rage so pure and hot it felt like it was going to burn me up from the inside out. All the years of being the good daughter, the responsible one, the endless sacrifices, the quiet resentment I had swallowed down, it all erupted at once. There was no plan, no strategy. There was only a primal need for a confrontation. I drove to their house, my hands clenched, white-knuckled on the steering wheel. I didn't care about the speed limit. I burst through the front door without knocking, a courtesy I no longer felt they deserved. They were all there, a perfect family portrait in the living room, my father and mother on the couch, and my brother Kevin lounging in an armchair, looking smug and relaxed in a brand new, expensive-looking watch that mirrored the one I'd seen on Father's Day. He was preening, a peacock whose feathers had been bought with my stolen future. They all looked up, startled by my sudden entrance. My mother opened her mouth to ask what was wrong, but I didn't give her the chance. I walked to the coffee table and slammed the letter from Paramount Financial Trust down on the glass surface. The sound made them all flinch. "Explain this," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet. My father picked it up, making a show of adjusting his glasses to read it, buying time. "I don't know what this is," he said, trying to sound dismissive. "Looks like some kind of bank error." "I called them, Dad," I said, my eyes locking onto his. "I spoke to the loan officer. I know you took out a $100,000 line of credit on my house, and I know you forged my signature to do it." The charade collapsed. My mother let out a small sob and buried her face in her hands. Kevin stared intently at the television, refusing to meet my gaze. My father's face hardened, the fake confusion replaced by a defiant glare. He threw the letter back on the table. "We had no choice," he snapped, his voice rising. "Your brother was in trouble. Real trouble." "It was for family," my mother mumbled from behind her hands. "Families are supposed to help each other." The justification, the complete lack of remorse, stunned me. "You committed fraud," I whispered, the words tasting like poison. "Against me." My father stood up, his chest puffed out with self-righteous anger. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just some paperwork. In our minds, this is still our house. We poured our lives into this place. We had a right to use its value to protect our son. Our son, not your brother. Our son. In that moment, the lines were drawn with absolute clarity. I wasn't his daughter, I was a resource, a bank that had become uncooperative. I looked at the three of them, a united front of entitlement and deceit, and the last vestiges of love I had for them withered and died. I didn't shout, I didn't cry. I simply turned around and walked out of the home I had saved, knowing it was the last time I would ever enter it as their daughter. The next time I dealt with them, it would be through a lawyer. The drive back to my apartment was unnervingly serene. The burning rage had cooled into a solid, heavy block of ice in my chest. There were no tears. For the first time, I wasn't mourning the loss of their love, because I finally accepted a fundamental truth. It was never there to begin with. It had been a transaction all along. I was their insurance policy, their human ATM, and the moment I stopped paying out, my value plummeted to zero. The confrontation hadn't been a tragedy, it had been a diagnosis. And now that I knew the disease, I could finally begin the treatment. I woke up the next morning feeling like a stranger in my own skin, but a stronger one. My entire life's purpose up to that point had been to absorb their chaos. Now my purpose was my own. I didn't call friends to cry or vent. Instead, I opened my laptop and spent 3 hours researching the most ruthless real estate fraud litigators in the state. I wasn't looking for a family counselor. I was looking for a shark. I found him in a man named Marcus Corbin, whose online reviews all said the same thing. He doesn't lose. Corbin's office was a world away from my family's cluttered, chaotic home. It was all dark wood, leather, and quiet efficiency. He was a sharp man in a tailored suit who listened to my story without a single interruption. I laid out the facts calmly, logically, presenting him with a neat folder containing a copy of the deed, the letter from the lender, and the email chain where my father requested the document for his insurance audit. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me with a newfound respect. "Ms. Evans," he said, his voice crisp, "this is not just a family squabble. This is bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Your father committed multiple felonies. We can go to the district attorney today, and he would likely face jail time." I considered it for a moment. The thought of my father in a prison jumpsuit held a certain appeal, but it wasn't what I wanted. Prison would make him a martyr. My mother and brother would rally around the narrative of the poor, desperate father driven to extremes, and the cold, unforgiving daughter who put him there. I didn't want the state to punish him. I wanted him to understand the consequences of his own actions, delivered by me. "No," I said firmly. "I want to do this through a civil suit. I want to control the process. I want the house." A slow, knowing smile spread across Corbin's face. He understood instantly. This wasn't about revenge in the common sense. It was about reclaiming power. He laid out a brilliant, cold-blooded strategy. My personal LLC would purchase the fraudulent $100,000 debt from the lender. Banks are usually eager to unload a toxic, fraudulent asset to avoid legal mess and write off the loss. Once I owned the debt, I would become the lien holder. I would be the bank. Then, we would file for foreclosure due to non-payment on the loan they took out illegally. On top of that, we'd file a civil suit for fraud. He pushed a calendar across the desk to schedule the next steps. My eyes fell on a date a few months away. Sunday, June 15th. Father's Day. "There," I said, pointing. "I want him served on that day, during his party." Corbin looked up from his notes, one eyebrow raised. He didn't question it. He simply nodded and made a note. The message would be delivered. The months leading up to Father's Day were an exercise in disciplined silence. As my lawyer, Mr. Corbin, worked quietly in the background, my family, emboldened by my lack of immediate action, seemed to believe they had won. They must have mistaken my silence for surrender. After a few weeks, the probing messages began. First, a text from my mother. "I know you're upset, but this family needs to heal. We can't let money pull us apart." It was a masterclass in deflection, painting me as the one holding a grudge over money, as if the crime itself was irrelevant. Then came the flying monkeys. My aunt called, her voice thick with condescending pity, to tell me that life is too short to hold on to anger and that I needed to be the bigger person and forgive my father. "He was only trying to protect your brother," she said, as if that noble excuse absolved him of felony fraud. I listened politely and said nothing. Their attempts to manipulate me only strengthened my resolve. They weren't sorry. They were just annoyed that their ATM was malfunctioning and creating a scene. Meanwhile, Kevin was living proof of their crime. His social media became a showcase for my stolen equity. There he was, clinking champagne glasses at a rooftop bar. There he was, posing by a new, ridiculously flashy sports car. He posted a photo of my parents at a fancy dinner with the caption, "Celebrating my first big business success with the two people who never stopped believing in me." Family first hustle. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I saved screenshots of every post and forwarded them to Corbin. They were building my case for me. While they celebrated, I was executing my plan with cold precision. My LLC, funded by my own hard-earned money, officially purchased the $100,000 fraudulent loan from Paramount Financial Trust. The bank was more than happy to wash its hands of the whole mess. Suddenly, I wasn't just the victim, I was the creditor. Corbin's office drafted the foreclosure notice and the civil complaint. We hired a discreet but imposing process server, a former Marine who specialized in delivering bad news with unshakable calm. The night before Father's Day, I sat in my quiet apartment, looking out at the city lights. I felt no rage, no anxiety. I felt only a profound sense of peace. I thought about the 10-year-old girl who had her bicycle money taken from her, and all the years she had spent since then, trying to be good enough, responsible enough to finally earn their approval. I was about to give that little girl her justice. This wasn't about destroying them. It was about saving myself. As I got in my car the next day and drove towards their street, the street where I grew up, I felt the satisfying click of a circle closing. The person driving away from that house after the confrontation was a victim. The person driving towards it now was an instrument of consequence. I watched from my car as the process server, a man of quiet professionalism, walked back to his vehicle, got in, and drove away. The ripples of his presence spread through the party instantly. The cheerful music was cut off. I saw guests glancing at my father, who was staring blankly at the papers in his hand, then looking at each other with awkward, hushed whispers. They started making their excuses, a handshake here, a quick, sympathetic pat on my mother's shoulder there. Within 15 minutes, the yard was nearly empty. The festive gathering had dissolved into a scene of domestic crisis, leaving only the three architects of my pain to stand among the wreckage. My phone, which had been peacefully silent for months, began to scream for my attention. The screen lit up with a parade of familiar names: Dad, Mom, Kevin, Aunt Carol, Uncle Mark. A relentless, desperate barrage. I pressed the silent button on the side of my phone and drove home, the frantic buzzing in the cup holder a soundtrack to my liberation. They no longer had access to me. The emergency line was officially disconnected. Later that evening, I poured myself a glass of expensive wine, a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat down to listen to the messages they had left. It was exactly as I had predicted. My father's voice was first, choked with rage. "You actually did it!" he barked, his voice breaking. "You sick, twisted girl, to do this to me on Father's Day, to humiliate me in front of my friends and family. You are trying to ruin me. You are no daughter of mine. You'll hear from my lawyer." He hung up with a slam. There was no apology, no remorse, only fury at being held accountable. Next was my mother, her message a waterfall of hysterical sobs. "Sweetheart, please, please call me," she wept. "Your father, I've never seen him like this. How could you be so cruel? You're tearing this family apart. We can fix this, I know we can, but you have to stop this. What will the neighbors think?" Her concern wasn't for the crime committed, but for the public image it shattered. Finally, there was Kevin. His voice was a high-pitched whine of pure, unfiltered entitlement. "Are you happy now?" he shrieked. "You're going to make us homeless, all because you couldn't stand to see me succeed for once? You've always been jealous of me. I hope you're proud of yourself. You've ruined everything." I listened to each message, one after the other, and felt nothing but a profound sense of confirmation. It was like reading the results of a scientific experiment that proved my hypothesis perfectly. Their reactions laid their characters bare. They were not victims, they were perpetrators, angry that their long-running scam had finally been called to a halt. I took a sip of my wine, savoring the taste. Then, calmly and methodically, I went through my phone's contact list and blocked every single one of them. The silence that followed was the sound of my own freedom. The legal battle my father had threatened was nothing more than a final, pathetic roar. As Mr. Corbin predicted, once their newly hired, low-budget lawyer saw the mountain of evidence we had, the email, the forged documents, the bank statements, Kevin's social media posts, he advised them that they had no case. Their only move was to try and beg for mercy. They requested a settlement meeting, and I agreed to attend. I wanted to see their faces one last time. We met in Corbin's conference room. I walked in wearing the kind of suit that cost more than the car Kevin was now about to have repossessed. My father, my mother, and Kevin sat on one side of the polished table, looking small and haggard. They thought they were there to negotiate with the daughter they knew. They were mistaken. When Mr. Corbin introduced me not just as his client, but as the founding partner of my own financial advisory firm, the firm whose LLC had legally acquired their debt, the color drained from their faces. The dawning horror in my father's eyes as he finally understood that he hadn't just stolen from his sensible daughter. He had committed fraud against a financial powerhouse who could crush him without a second thought, was more satisfying than any shouting match. He realized he had burned down his entire world for a book of matches. They offered a rambling, tearful apology, begging me to let them stay in the house, promising to pay me back someday. I looked at them, not with hatred, but with a kind of detached pity. "The time for apologies is over," I said calmly. "The consequences are already in motion." The foreclosure was finalized a month later. An eviction notice was posted on the front door of the house I grew up in. They were given 30 days to vacate the property that was legally mine. Mr. Corbin told me they left it in a state of disarray, a final petty act of vandalism against a life they felt entitled to. It didn't matter. It was just a house. Their downfall was swift and absolute. With a civil judgment for fraud hanging over his head and his credit rating in ashes, my father could not secure a loan for anything. He and my mother now live in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. The king of the backyard barbecue was dethroned. Kevin's car was repossessed, and without my family's funding, he was forced to get a job stocking shelves on the night shift at a local grocery store. The golden child's shine had worn off, revealing the cheap material underneath. I hired a professional crew to clear out the house, erasing every last trace of their existence from its walls. I had it repainted, refurbished, and put it on the market. It sold in a week. Signing the final closing papers, I felt the last tie to them sever. The revenge was complete, not because they were miserable, but because I was finally free. They had taught me the ultimate lesson. Family is not about blood, it's about respect. And in their absence, I had finally learned to respect myself.